My name's Anna May, and I'm a forester in the 4th generation in the Starker family. The Starker Forest started in 1936 by my great-grandfather, T.J. Starker, and it's been in the family ever since, going to my grandfather, Bruce, and then my dad and uncle, Bart and Bond, and now me and my brother and a couple of my cousins are also involved in the business. The Starker Lecture Series started as a way to honor TJ as well as Bruce, because they're both really interested in forums for debate and new ideas in forestry. After they both passed away, the family thought it'd be a good way to carry on their legacy.
Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to the 2023 Starker Lecture Series. My name is Carlos Gonzalez. I'm a faculty at Fern Department here at the College of Forestry of Oregon State University. Thanks to everybody for being with us this afternoon. Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon is located within the traditional homelands of the Marys River or Ampinefu Band of Kalapuya. Following the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855, Kalapuya people were forcibly removed to reservations in Western Oregon. Today, living descendants of these people are a part of the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. The theme of the 2023 Starker Lecture Series is Innovations in Forestry. Forestry has a long history of innovation amidst changing physical, social, and economic conditions. Recent and current technological innovations include the use of geospatial analysis, sensing tools, and artificial intelligence to improve outcomes in the woods, as well as in the mills and construction. We also make changes in how we make choices through social innovations. This year's lectures will look at some historical changes as well as new innovations in technologies and collaborative work. After today's lecture, we will have a question and answer section, and then we hope you can join us for a reception out in the atriums. SAF credits are available, and certificates can be picked up in the back of the room. Today's lecture is, we have the opportunity of having Dr. Tom Fox, who is the president at Rayonier and leads the research, is a vice president at Rayonier and leads the research, productivity, and sustainability team. He coordinates Rayonier's research and technology transfers in silviculture and tree improvement and oversees the ecosystem services and forest certification programs. Prior to joining Rayonier, Tom was the Honorable Garland Gray Distinguished Professor of Forestry at Virginia Tech. He also was the co-director of the Forest Productivity Cooperative and the site director of the NSF Center for Advanced Forestry Systems. Dr. Fox was a Fulbright scholar and visiting professor at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile in Santiago, Chile. Tom received a Bachelor in Forestry and Wood Products and a certificate of advanced study in pulp and paper science from the University of Maine. He also received a Master in Science in Forest Soils from Virginia Tech and a PhD in Soil Science from the University of Florida. He is a registered professional forester in Maine and Georgia, a SAF certified forester, and an SSSA certified professional soil scientist. He received the Stephen Spur Award for Research and the Barrington Moore Award for Research in Biological Sciences from the Society of American Foresters. He currently serves on the SAF Board of Directors and chairs the Finance Committee. He's a fellow in the Soil Science Society of America and the Society of American Foresters. Please help me to welcome fantastic Mr. Tom Fox.
Thank you, Carlos. You're the only one that I've had that can pronounce Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Appreciate that. So first, I want to thank the Starker family and Starker Forest for the opportunity and the invitation to come here, the College of Forestry at Oregon State as well. It's really an honor. You know, I'm just a dirt forester, so to have time to stand in front of you guys is somewhat intimidating, but it's really appreciate the opportunity for this. And so what I thought I'd like to talk to you a little bit today is this whole concept of innovation was interesting to think through that. It's been fun doing it over the last few months as I thought about it. And so what I'm going to do is just give you a perspective. I'm not going to tell you probably anything, but this is the way one private forest company kind of has thought about innovation and the sort of things that we do and how it has affected our organization. You may see some similarities between other organizations. Maybe there's some things different. And I think that's part of the conversation perhaps that would be beneficial to have with this. And so before we really get started, okay, I'll do this. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about Rayonier. Rayonier's not a roll off the tongue kind of forest product company that you've all heard of. Anybody heard about Rayonier? Great. Better than most places I go. And so we're currently a forest products company, forestry company. We're structured, most of our life, we were a typical integrated forest products company with lands and mills and stuff. We divested our mills finally in 2014. So we're just a forestry organization focused solely on forestry. We're currently structured as a real estate investment trust. And so that has some implications on how we operate. You know, we have to generate 75% of our income from REIT-qualified income. So we got to distribute 90% to our shareholders. So there's some things that are different than a C Corp. And so that influences the way we operate. We've been in business as a company for about 96 years now. And actually, a few years ago, we acquired Pope Resources. And so our legacy actually dates back to 1853, when Pope built a sawmill in Fort Gamble, Washington, which at the time was Oregon territory, which I think is pretty cool. And we still own that. We actually own the town. So we bought the town. So that's another kind of interesting thing. And our legacy on forestry, by 1870, Pope owned 250,000 acres on the Olympic Peninsula. And we still manage large tracts of that today. So it's interesting to have that legacy dating back, well over 100 years with it. And so our company is focused on forestry. And so we own timberland, forest land, in 3 general regions of the world. The Southern United States, where we own about 1.9 million acres from Texas to Florida, with the exception of Mississippi. New Zealand, where we own land from the tip of the North Island to the tip of the South Island, with about 417,000 acres. And then here in the Northwest, where we own about 474,000 acres. Most of it's still in Washington, where our legacy property was, and about 61,000 acres are here in Oregon, a little bit up in Scappoose area, the bulk of it in Curry County and Coos Bay. And so that's our land base, totaling the 2.8 million acres. And just for your satisfaction, this is Fort Gamble, Washington here, where the mill town is. And this is a timberland that Pope had in the 1870s that we still manage. And you go out there and it's really fun to go look at a stand that you have that history dating all the way back to that long. And when we talk about sustainability and those things, it's a great story to talk about the sustainability of those forests. And again, as a pure play timber REIT, forests and healthy productive forests are the foundation of all that we do today. We don't focus too much on other activities other than the forest and the land base that we have. And that gives us some advantages and obviously some disadvantages in terms of how we operate with it. And so and primarily we manage conifer forests. And so in the Southern United States, we manage loblolly pine, slash pine, longleaf pine, smattering of other things. We do some sand pine, sort of species. And in the Zealand. Obviously, it's mostly radiata pine, a little bit of Douglas fir, a little bit of some hybrids that we work with. And then out here, it's Western hemlock and Douglas fir, a little bit of true fir, a little bit of cedar, a little bit of Sitka spruce. And what's unique a little bit about Rayonier is the bulk of our land base is on the west side of the Olympic Peninsula. So we are in the hemlock Sitka spruce zone, not so much the Doug fir zone. So as a company, Western hemlock has always been really important to us. Probably more so and proportionally more than many other landowners. I don't know if any other organization has focused as much on Western hemlock as we've done, just because of where we own the land. The other thing that's important to understand, although we talk about our planted forest as what we just mentioned, about a third of our land base in each region is comprised of natural forests. So in the south, it's a lot of swamps and wetland areas. There are managed forests, obviously, that we manage, but a big proportion of our land base is in that. Here in the northwest, about a third of our land is in riparian zones and those sort of things, non-restricted areas. And even in New Zealand, about a third of our land base is in natural forests, native forests. In some places we can manage that. In the southeast, we manage hardwood, natural regeneration and things. Here in the northwest, not so much, because those are all sort of restricted areas. And then in New Zealand, all native forests in New Zealand are restricted from harvest. So that third of the land base that we own is not part of our harvest activities. Our business, as a large landowner, our business focuses on three general activities. One is obviously forestry. The second is real estate. We've owned timberland for a long time. When we bought it, it was in the middle of nowhere. Now it's in the middle of the city. We own a lot of our land base in the south is on the I-95 corridor from like Daytona Beach, Florida to Savannah. Florida is the fastest growing state in the country, and they all come to want to live close to the ocean. And so we have a huge pressure for real estate development. And so one of the things we did a number of years ago, was put together a real estate division so we could manage and sustainably develop that so that we could cohabitat, if you will, our development activities with our ongoing forestry activities. And that hasn't always been the case. Sometimes you'll find, you got development, and then in the middle of it, you're trying to forest, you're trying to manage intensively, and it just doesn't work very well. So we've been trying to work through that. And then the other piece that's increasingly important is what we call our land resources group. Because as a large landowner, there's all sorts of other things that happen on the land that you can either benefit from. So in this case, we're showing you our first wind farm we put up in Oklahoma. We do solar fields, we do pipelines, we do minerals, we do, and all those sort of things that come from the land base, recreation, hunting, licenses, those sort of things. So those are our three business segments. And for what I'm going to talk about today is primarily the forestry side of the business, obviously. We're also sustainable. It's a big aspect of us. So we're FSC certified in New Zealand and SFI certified in the United States. With, again, this idea of intergenerational equity and ensuring that what we do today doesn't impinge on future generations to also get the same, wood, non-timber forest products, air quality, water quality, all those sort of things from it. And this is just a snippet of sustainability. So we purchased our first timberland as a company in July of 1937 in Yulee, Florida. And we still own that tract today. It's really fun to go look at that tract. That's tract number 1. My office is right here. That's my office. That's on a tract that we bought on February 4th, 1938. And this is what the tract looked like in the 1930s. This is an exact, we're not sure whether this picture is from North Florida, and it shows navel stores and sort of slash longleaf pine and free range cattle. That's how the forest was when we bought it. This picture is actually, that's this same stand. This was taken, we donated an acre to the Forest Service right behind our office, and there's a fire tower there. So we go up and we take pictures all the time. now it's fallen down, so we can't, so we got to use drones, but we still do the same thing. But this is the first rotation that we established in 1960. So it was planted, our plantation started in the 40s. That was probably getting close to mid-rotation at the time, stand in 1960. And here it is today. in its fourth rotation. So when we talk about sustainability, we have, it's really fun in my office to have the concrete sustainability story for there. And what we can show is our rotation aids have declined and our productivity has gone up through forest management. And that's a really compelling story to be able to relate to people with it. So, so if we start thinking about innovation, right? Rayonier, for our entire life, we've also, as a company, we've been a publicly traded company. There's no family ownership, and so I have no familiarity with that. But it's kind of different, I think. And so in 1926, 3 pulp companies here on the Olympic Peninsula joined together to form Rayonier Pulp and Paper Company. And they were manufacturing white paper and writing paper and those sort of things. One in Shelton, Washington, one in Grace Harbor, and one in Port Angeles. And in the Depression, the markets weren't too good, so they were looking for another product. So they worked with DuPont, who then at the time was the leading manufacturer of rayon, and they made rayon from cotton, and particularly cotton linters, which is the off material from ginning cotton, the little fibers that come off the seed, which can't be used for clothing and stuff. But it was really expensive, and so our scientists at the time worked with DuPont to develop the first high purity dissolving grade of pulp from Western hemlock, which we own a lot of, that could be used for rayon. And it was a great success. So innovation essentially changed the company. And they called that pulp Rayonier. And within like 2 or 3 years, we changed the name of the company to Rayonier to reflect that pulp. And so obviously Rayonier is rayon plus Mount Rainier kind of merged together. So that's how innovation started our company really on the road that we've been on since the 1920s. And then our forestry R&D and the innovations that we're trying to do in forestry really began in the early 1950s. We started planting in the South in about the 1940 or so. We would harvest some stands and we'd replant. And the way we got seedlings was we'd go to the woods and dig up some little seedlings and move them, or we'd buy some from a state nursery. But we made a commitment in the early 50s to start a much more intensive program. So we started a tree improvement program in the 1950s. I think that was like in 1952. And then our first seedling nursery was 1953. And that was to provide the seed and the seedlings that we needed to expand that planting program. And the snippet, this isn't the exact seed orchard, but we established the first seed orchard of grafted / pine, we think, in the South. And it was one of the first seed orchards ever established in the United States. And we've had a program ever since. And that's one of the key pieces when we think about innovation is sort of stability in those efforts. Because forestry is a long-term business. And if you get in and get out, you tend not to make a lot of progress. And so I thought a lot about innovation and one of the things that I've tried to think through, like, what is the process that leads to success in innovation? And this is a great paper. I don't know if everybody's read it, called Strong Inference by John Platt. It was written in 1964. But if you haven't read it, I tell you to go and read it because it is an incredible paper. Platt was a physicist. And he's written tons of stuff. He's really productive. But in this paper, he asked the question in 1964, why do certain fields of science or certain fields of scientific endeavor make more progress than others? And at the time, he was really talking about genetics because we just invented or just discovered DNA, right? So he's trying to think through why are the biologists making so much progress when, in his mind, the mathematics and the physicists weren't doing anything? And he writes really eloquently, and he has a great way of criticizing people in such a pleasant way. You don't really seem to know if he's criticizing you until like the end of the paper, and you realize, oh. And you can summarize his thoughts in this, and I've taken them to heart. Actually, every graduate student I've ever had to read this paper, and everybody in Raynier's research team has to read this paper because he talks about what leads to strong inference, our ability to make, scientific progress. And it's really, in his mind, one of these points that we have to be problem oriented, not methods focused. We need methodology and we need sound and advanced methods to do it, but we have to focus on the problem rather than focus on, I'm a methods guy. We all probably know something, I do XYZ, and I can't work on this problem because that's not my method doesn't solve that problem. And he kind of wants to flip that on its side and say, well, that really, we should all, if we focus on the problem and then figure out what the right method is, you're going to have a chance to make science. He's clear on this in that it's really strong hypothesis, particularly the ability to have a strong hypothesis and the ability to test that. And what he says is actually reject a hypothesis, because you don't make progress if you can't reject the hypothesis. And so without having strong hypotheses, you're just sort of spinning your wheels. He also advances the idea of multiple working hypotheses. We don't know, so we have to have multiple hypotheses. And then each of those still needs to be strong so we can test them. And then the idea of systematically applying this process time and time again. And his view, that's sort of what leads to advancement in scientific thinking. And it's resonated with me, whether it does with you or not. But I would encourage you to read the paper. I find it really nice to deal with. And so schematically, I do that. I'm a dirt guy, right? So I brought a soul sieve. But that's kind of the way I think about this approach. Is this? You have multiple working hypotheses, right? So they all throw into the sieve. Some of them work, some of them don't. But you got to be able to sieve them out, right? Reject or fail to reject those, and some of those hypotheses will come out, and you reject them. Some of them you don't reject, and so they could be plausible, right? In the same context, this kind of approach to the process of the idea of, basic science, kind of building into the application or the applied sciences, and then the next step is really operational implementation. And so, Rayonier is a company, we're at this end. We deal with applied research and operational implementation. We don't do much basic research, but we rely on that. And so universities, federal labs, those sort of things, those advances in basic science feed into the applied science that we're trying to do, and then the operational implementation. And what's interesting when you think about basic research, leading to applied research, leading to operational, it's not linear like this. This isn't really the way it always happens, right? But it's this sieve again. If you do a whole bunch of basic research, some stuff's going to flow out of that, and maybe ultimately is going to lead to stuff that can be operationally implemented. And there's the story, right? Apologies to Al Gore, but the internet was really invented based on 3 unrelated basic sort of research projects that came around, right? So DARPA funded the research that developed the TCP/IP protocol, right? Because of what they wanted to do in military research. Had nothing to do with anything else. They had a goal they wanted to do, right? And so CERN in Switzerland invented sort of the World Wide Web to move information back and forth. And then the Institute for Supercomputing and the University of Illinois kind of invented the browser separate. Those 3 things, basic research, no thought about applications really, all done independently, ultimately were kind of the key features that led to the internet that we see today. And so that's an interesting, I think that's always important. That's why basic research, I don't know where it's going to lead, but some of it's going to lead us in the direction we want to go with it. So if we want to follow Platt's idea and be innovative in forestry with it, what does an organization need to do that? Particularly a forestry organization. And there's a number of things that I think an organization, or what we try to have, in an organization that helps us to perhaps do some innovation. One is we have to have reasonable expectations of what's possible and then what's realistic. If you have if your expectations are instant success and fundamental changes that triple productivity alert, that might not happen, right? So you also need to have an idea within that, where are the roadblocks going to be? And how do we think about overcoming those? Particularly in forestry, the idea of having a long-term focus and the time frame has to match forest growth. If your work is focused on 5 years, but your rotation is 30 years or 40 years or 20 years, and you have that out of phase kind of approach, you're probably not going to stick to it. Where do we want to be on the innovation curve? You could be on the cutting edge, or what we tend to think of as the bleeding edge of technology, or could you be a fast follower, or could you be one that comes along and, hey, this is proven technology and we're going to implement it. And so as a company, we tend to be in fast follower, we think, a little bit. Sometimes we'll just pick stuff off the shelf that's proven technology, as opposed to trying to be right on the cutting edge of forestry. Really important is the tolerance of failure. Yeah, if you're going to be innovating, you're going to fail a lot. And you have to recognize that, and the organization has to be supportive of that, of your failures as well as your successes. Remember, going back, you got to be able to reject your hypothesis, which is, a lot of people think that's a failure, but it's the way you make success that's important. And then if you're going to innovate, you really have to have a capacity internally, right? You have to have the people, the right people with the skills, the people that have the time to do it. It's hard to ask a field forester that's spending 110% of their time, doing X, Y, Z in the field and trying to keep the operation going. Oh, and by the way, in your spare time, go do some, innovating, or do the R&D that's needed to support the innovation. And you got to fund it. It's not free with it. And then part of it too is separate than tolerance of failure is the risk tolerance. How much risk are you willing to take to implement the innovation, right? You can think of this statistically, right? If you rely on everything to be a p-value of 0.05, you're going to be disappointed a lot in operational forestry. I tell everybody we're at like 0.75, 0.6, 0.51. It's more than random, right? Because we're going to have to make decisions, and we have to constantly make those operational decisions. And I want people to make the best decision they can. And if the probability is 3/4, run with it. If the probability is 20%, maybe we shouldn't do it. But that risk tolerance is there. If everything we try has to be 99% certain, we're probably not going to do anything. Finally, scale. If you do spend a lot of energy and effort, but you can only implement it on 1,000 acres, probably doesn't make enough funding to generate what we need. And then last, and I think really most important, is the culture that you have in your organization. You need a culture of innovation, and the culture that we're going to implement this. And really that's simply, we need a can-do attitude versus we can't do that. And that's what we try and foster within our organizations, is these kinds of things. We fail a lot. We spend money that was a bad decision. But we try and have the people. We got a small research team. We've been constant for since the 50s. There's about 35 of us that are in the R&D group. But for a small company like us, that's a pretty significant investment. But it's a stable investment, and we'd rather have that than 50 one year, and then 2 years later we're down to 10 with it. So that's when we think about what innovation is. And the other piece that's important is R&D and innovation and stuff. We know they can add value, but it really doesn't ensure long-term success. So I'll let you read. You can put your own names, right? These were our competitors. When I started working for Rayonier in 1989. And they all had bigger research organizations than we did. Eric Cruz was, won, as a company, won, the Nobel Prize for Forestry, as a company. Eric Cruz doesn't exist. And so I'll just leave you with that thought, that's where I think that all this has to fit together and what's appropriate for your organization with it in order to, ensure your long-term success. So in that context, what we have kind of focused on for our, the big overarching goals, not the specifics, not the strategy plan or whatever, but just the goals. What we want to do is increase the productivity, efficiency, safety, and job satisfaction of our foresters. We're a forestry company. We are bottom up. Our field foresters make the decisions. We don't have a corporate office top-down dictator. We don't have a chief forester. I have no authority over any field forester to do anything. I have to convince them that this is the right thing to do, and they can push back and say that's stupid. And that's what we want. Those are the individuals that have to make. So we think we're very proud of our foresters, but what we have to figure out is how can they be more productive? How can they be more efficient? How can they be safer? How are they happier with their job? We want them to be happy because we're going to spend a lot of energy and effort to train them. And we don't want them to go to another company because they're unhappy with our company. And we believe that they're the basis of our success. Because if we have that, then it's possible for us to increase the productivity, the value, and the sustainability of our forest, which is really what we want to do as a company. But we can't do it without the foresters that we have. And so that's, and again, our greatest limiting resource is the time of our foresters. They just, we own 3 million acres, 2.8 million acres. How do you do that? We have 400 people. And so if we can make them more efficient, more productive, we'll be successful. And then this idea of productivity of our forest is important because that's what really drives us, the value of our company to our investors is the productivity improvements that we can get. So this is data in the South. I'm going to show you a little bit of Southern data and a little bit of Northwest data. So the graph on the left is our measured site index annual inventory of the forest in the South. And you can see in 1990, our average site index was about 65 feet, base age 25. Right? Today, it's somewhere about 78. And I like this because I told you, I joined Rayonier in '89. Coincidence? I'll let you decide. But, and we know that this productivity gain is caused by the silviculture we impose. So the graph on the upper right, is sort of a paper we wrote a number of years ago showing changes in productivity through time and the silvicultural treatments that combined or were developed to create that. And so in the 1940s, when we purchased our timberland, it was probably growing, 50 tons per acre in a 40-year rotation. Today, we're probably growing 200 tons in a 20-year rotation, 22-year rotation, 18-year rotation. And the change on the bottom right is obvious. What happens? Site index goes up, yield goes up, particularly the product value goes up. We produce more larger wood. So we have more higher value wood. That's what drives, productivity improvement as a driver of our value. And this is what our shareholders are interested in. And so how do we do that? And so our approach to what we do and how we try and innovate is related to this simple thought of what we try to practice and implement is market-driven precision forestry. And so what we want to do is use the insights that we have on understanding forest markets. We got a bunch of economists that work. What's the future going to be? Who knows, but they tell us. And then what we know about engineering and harvesting and transportation and geology, soils, genetics, silviculture to optimize the productivity, not maximize, optimize it. So that we have acceptable financial returns and sustainability, so that we provide returns to our shareholders. That's what we're trying to do. Simplified, we want to do the right thing on every acre. And this is where R&D comes in, you know, in terms of we can produce the innovations we hope, or help produce the innovations to drive this process. But it all spoke, you know, and it's sort of flipped, you know, instead of, oh, here's the biology and the silviculture and stuff, and here's what we're going to grow. We would turn around and say, what is the product that we want to grow, and how do we produce that in the best way possible? And so that's key to what we do. And so markets drive our business. Markets drive all forest business, right? You know, you always see the thing, right? Where are the sustainable forests in this world? They are the places where there's strong markets. If there's no market for the wood, the forest gets converted to something else, or, you know, it's so far removed, it's not good. You know, that's why they're converting the Amazon to corn, soybeans, and cattle. Not much market, and there's a lot of market for soybeans and cattle. So it's an economic driver. So, you know, here's, you know, the Northwest, you know, so for us, you know, and we again focus from a silviculture forestry standpoint on net stumpage. A lot of times we talk delivered price, but you got to strip out cutting, loading, and transportation to get back to net stumpage. And that has a big impact, because there's places where, you know, the harvesting costs are so high, the wood is so far from a mill, that you strip those out and you got negative stumpage value. That has a big impact on what you do. So we've got to understand those markets, but we'll produce anything, you know, saw timber, pulp, domestic export, biomass energy. You know, we don't have a facility to market into any specifics. So we look at the markets, and the markets vary drastically across very small regions. 50 miles makes a huge difference in a market, particularly in today's world where wood doesn't flow very far anymore because of the logistic issues and the trucking issues we have. Loggers don't want to haul 100 miles anymore because they get one load a day, you know, instead of 3 or 4. So this is what drives our business, is understanding these markets and then producing the forest for each of those specific markets. And what's interesting today is these markets are always changing, but they're changing really significantly today because the market is not just timber. The market today is all the other goods and services that come from the forest. There's a market for water. There's a market for, you know, recreational opportunities, a market for wildlife. There's markets for carbon. So all of these things are the markets that we have to think about and compare them to the existing traditional markets. Because we want to optimize what we're doing. And if, you know, if carbon's going to be worth more than saw timber, we'd grow carbon. It's not the case today. But, you know, if you read the projections, you know, that's going to be the case in 2050 or 2100, unless stumpage prices go up incredibly high for, you know, when you start talking about carbon prices at $100 a ton, that really gets you thinking, but what are we going to be as a company in 2100s? Doesn't really change. It's still the market. We would manage for that market. That's what we're doing. And then how do we do that? Through precision forestry. That's where the linking the market. So we do precision forestry as a way to create the kinds of stands that we want. So, you know, site prep, genetics, weed control, fertilization, all the tools that we have in our toolbox. And we know in the South that this happens, right? We do a lot and we change a site index 55 to an 85. Those are 2 plots, research plots, and those plots are right next to one another. You take the picture going this way and you see the one on the left, you turn around and take the picture this way, and it's a stand on the right. That's the kind of gain you can get from precision forestry applied correctly. The really important thing isn't that. The really important thing is neither one of those are intrinsically right or wrong. They both can be right or wrong in the specific circumstances of that market that we're trying to deal with. Right? So we have to understand that. That's why markets are so important for us to determine which one we do. If we did everything massively intensively on the right, that's not the best decision. we did everything on the left, that's not the best decision. That's what precision forestry really is matching your silviculture to the soils, to the geology, to the sites to meet the market demand that you've got. And and I think that's an interesting innovation, is that concept of managing and creating what we need in the markets rather than having it the other way around. Well, we're going to grow it and then they'll have to market it, whatever it is. You know, we all hear that, right? Doesn't matter what we grow, they'll be able to sell it. We're not quite so sure. And then again, same thing in the Northwest, right? This is what's really neat. It's no different. We have the same tools in the Northwest, right? We got genetic improvement. You know, there's obligatory big tree, little tree pictures throughout this, but you know, this is, you know, here, you know, the Northwest Tree Improvements, one of their studies, right? Big tree, little tree. Genetics makes a difference, right? We know that. You know, so we have a fairly aggressive tree improvement program in the West. Weed control, Carlos's programs told us weed control is very important. You know, fertilization, PCT, all those sort of things are the same tools, and they can have the same impact on productivity here in the Northwest than they can have in the South. If they're done correctly with precision across a land base. Not everywhere responds to fertilizer. Matter of fact, most places in the Northwest that we own don't respond to fertilizer. And, you know, for years, I'm a fertilizer guy. I spent most of my career doing fertilizer, and that was the most frustrating thing. But I finally realized, you know, a few years ago, that's actually good, because it means those sites aren't nutrient limited. If they're not nutrient limited, you know, thank you. You know, we got better soil in the Northwest than I have in the South. I got every soil I've got in the South is nutrient limited by nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, you name it. It's easy to get a fertilizer response. Not so much here. And I think you got, you know, a lot of organic matter in the soils. We got clay soils. We got good geology. It's just not nutrient limited at the rate that they're growing. Maybe if we really pump productivity or something, they will be, but that's why we don't fertilize much out here. And it's still a tool on the right size. We also have to understand the growth. So our friends at SIPS and, you know, elsewhere, you know, how do we model growth, right? Because we need to understand growth. So here's just, I think this is actually out of DF-SIN. It's an old, you know, but it doesn't matter, right? What happens as site index goes up, yield goes up, you know, so as we do intensive silviculture, we should expect yield to go up. But even more important to us, thinking about the financial returns and discounted cash flow and stuff, is the graph on the right. That's just taking those curves on the left and calculating current annual increment out of it and plotting current annual increment from those curves. Right? And you see what happens. That should be exciting to everybody. Right? Because if I can push productivity, two things I do. Obviously, I increase productivity, but I accelerate stand development, and that occurs earlier in the rotation. You know, we talk about something that we call the wonder years of early stand development. And those of you that are old enough as I am to remember the Wonder Years commercial, you know, that's what it is for Wonder Bread. Right? How do we grow strong bodies and strong bodies and healthy minds or something? but that's it, right? So what it means to us is if we increase productivity through increasing site index, we're going to have accelerate stand development. We're going to have greater yield at a shorter rotation. From a discounted cash flow analysis for a publicly traded company that our investors want their dividend every quarter, you know, we live and die by discounted cash flow. Present value equals future value divided by 1 + I raised to the T. He's in the denominator and the exponent. He's our worst enemy in forestry, because you start putting 30, 40, 50, 70, 80, 100 years in T in the denominator and dividing your future stumpage value by that, particularly if you use high discount rates, your present values goes to nothing. So that's the financial side that drives us to lower rotation lengths, you know. So the other thing to think about too is again, this idea of innovation and what innovation works and doesn't work. And so in tree improvement, again, it's one of the things we've worked on for, you know, since the very start. And this is the path we sort of always envision, right? You're going to start with these open pollinated orchards. We know that that's only half the genetic gain because we got bad parents pollen coming in from outside the orchard. So we want to do control pollination where we control the male and the female. We get better yields and better gain. And then ultimately, like we want clones, right? We want to find that basically exact best tree and develop it, right? That's what, Pete Farnham and, the biotechnology of forest productivity science paper that Pete wrote in 1978, 79 or whatever, from when he was with Weyerhaeuser, shows that. You've got these graphs and stuff. We're going to have unlimited, germplasm from these clonal production labs that will be ultimate, the greatest that we can get. We spend a lot of time, I think like a lot of other people, doing it. But if we look at genetics and treatment today, at least in our company, you can look at the technology that we just have not been able to operationalize. A number of these are really, from a researcher's standpoint, I'm kind of disappointed in ourselves. We just haven't done a good job, I guess, of figuring this out. But genetics and genomics, the thought of marker-rated selection, we really get excited about that, but we just can't make it work. We don't have markers that are reliable. We don't do it. But the only genomics work we do is in some of our programs where if we're doing control pollination, we test the parent to make sure it's actually the right parent. Because somebody sometimes makes a mistake and the tree's coded wrong in the seed orchard or wherever. So before we do any control pollination, we check the parents. Is that really the parent we want to breed? That's the extent of our genomics work. And that's unfortunate. Somatic embryogenesis, you can make a somatic embryogenesis work. You can produce seedlings. They don't survive and grow very well. They're essentially a failure. That's why clonal forestry sort of failed, because we could produce the clones, but we couldn't produce reliably the clones we wanted to. And when we could, they wouldn't produce good seedlings. And we all know what happens when we produce a bad seedling and plant it out there and think it's going to grow well. It's got no roots, it's got no foliage, but it's a clone. Genetic engineering, Steve Strauss has been a leader on that. We can't do it. I guess you could now. I hear there's a permit that was issued for a poplar for climate change out of aphids, but the ones Steve had, right? He had to plant them and then tear them up because we can't release those into the environment. And even in the South, rooted cuttings, the way that clonal forestry works anywhere else in the world is rooted cuttings, and we couldn't get it to work in southern pine. What does work for us, rooted cuttings in New Zealand works great. Radiata is amenable to that. Control pollination, half our seed is produced control pollinated in the South. We're starting to do it out here in the Northwest with that. And then in New Zealand, we are working with hybrids. We're trying to hybridize Pinus radiata with Pinus attenuata, another coastal California kind of species, because it's cold tolerant. Currently, when we get above a certain elevation, we start switching from radiata, which doesn't like cold, to Douglas fir. Isn't that weird? Out here where we don't want to plant Doug fir at high elevations, but in New Zealand, that's what we were using. So we're swapping on, trying to use that hybrid. We've been deploying that. It's really pretty exciting with it. And then we have new technology on the horizon, CRISPR-Cas9. I have no idea. Without genomic, I don't think it's going to work very well for us, because without genomics and genetics, I don't know how we're going to pick the genes that we want to move around within that CRISPR system. And one, just as an aside, why didn't this work when it works in agriculture so well? And part of it, flippantly, is it works in agriculture because what you're growing is the seed or the fruit. That's the thing that you want to yield. And the genetic improvement of seed and fruit quality, all that sort of stuff, is much better understood in agriculture. They don't care about growing volume of the plant. They actually don't want much volume, right? All the advanced wheat is short wheat with less biomass, so it doesn't lodge. What do we want to grow? I grew up growing corn and soybeans in Ohio, and joke with my cousins, I grow the chaff. That's all we do. We don't want the seed. Matter of fact, we don't want our plantations going to seed because it takes, and then we got volunteer pines all over the place. So, there's fundamental differences, and I hope it works. I hope it works in my lifetime. I know it won't work in my career anymore, but so that's important for us to understand with it. Other innovations are really working well, right? So the tools and technology we have to do site-specific forestry, right? So we have a good understanding of geology and soils. We've mapped all our own soils. We have geology. We understand landscape aspect, topography, all those sort of things. North aspect, south aspect out here, elevation, soil properties in the south. So that's the basis of everything we do and how we're deploying it. So that's done. GIS, things like GIS and satellite navigation revolutionize what we've done. Right? You can put a treatment where you want it because you have a shapefile that says it should go here. And then you got a GPS unit and a helicopter or an airplane or even a farm tractor now or a skidder that says put it right here, don't put it over here. That technology is there. And then what really excites me right now is LiDAR technology. You know, we just completed flying all of our land base with LiDAR. Took 3 years to do it, and we're going around probably doing it on a 3-year cycle with it. And so I'll show you a little bit about LiDAR. A couple of examples. So here's some LiDAR from property in Washington. And you can see what you get, right? And any forester just looks at this and instantly knows how to use it. Right? You know, the high resolution elevation model, DEM, digital elevation model. This is done in a hillshade kind of approach. Every logger, forest engineer, this is great. Awesome. We use it for, you know, everything we do. We don't leave the house in the morning without a digital elevation map of where we're going with it. You can also then get the canopy height, right? We get canopy height. I'm firmly convinced that we get canopy height more accurately with LiDAR than we can ever get measuring it from the ground. Who's measured the height of a tree with a clinometer or a laser in the middle of a Doug fir stand in the middle of the rain and thinks they can get, you know, within 3 feet? You know, our target, our requirement for our cruisers is within plus minus 5 feet. That's what we tell them. With LiDAR, we're within a foot difference. When we do LiDAR and then we come back and cut the tree down and actually measure it, like Gifford Pinchot said, do you want to know how old a tree is or how tall it is? When you cut it down and measure it, we're within a foot. So it's more accurate, I believe. I got to convince our inventory folks that that's the case because they don't listen to me either. But important. We also get, once we have the hillshades and stuff, things like slope, understanding slope. So this is a slope classification. The red is steep slopes. We use this in a lot of ways. One is in our inventory process, right? And safety of our foresters. We used to put foresters out and put a grid out and measure everything, right? And we had a lot of injuries of forests on really steep slopes out here. Particularly if we sent them out in the winter when it's slippery and stuff and, you know, and trips and falls and things and people getting hurt. To measure trees on parts of the unit that were never going to be harvested because they were too steep and they weren't allowed to be harvested and they were going to come out in the unstable slope section for our forest harvesting plan. But why are we putting people in those areas? So we actually use LiDAR now for all of our inventory people, and here's the maximum slope. You're not supposed to go on those excessively steep slopes because the risk is too high. When we talk about safety and, you know, job satisfaction of our foresters, they like that because there's not much timber there and we couldn't harvest it. Also, we'll talk a little bit about new harvesting technologies, right? Cable assisted or winch assisted, cable assisted logging, how we do that is really important. And then what's also cool is the ability to use the canopy point cloud, the point cloud itself to tell us, right? So you don't need these analyses, you get this. So all of our data, we've got every stand that we have is in our inventory system with the point cloud there. So it shows up, and then there's a free software called Poetry that allows you to draw a line in there, flip it, and look at the cross section. So tell me what's going on here. You guys have never seen this. What are we looking at? So what's this?
Understory.
What's that? The trees, right? That's the trees. What's this underneath there? That's the brush, right? What happens right here? No brush. That's a plot. That's a research plot. Right? So, you know, we do a lot of brush control. So all of a sudden we know where it is, how much there is, without having to walk through the woods. And it's not pleasant. Some places to walk through the brush. not effective. And so again, using this is just, really, I think it's going to revolutionize what we do. And again, one of the things is it becomes this link to other things that we do. So this is a picture of a cable-assisted, winch-assisted. This is actually New Zealand. One of the first times I went to New Zealand to look at it, because our New Zealand group had been way ahead of us in this. Matter of fact, they brought it to the United States, this technology, and we brought them to show us how to do it out here. And so this idea that you have the ability now to harvest on steeper slopes and do it safely, do it more effectively. One, we can get cutters off the ground, so they're not in the woods. We can, if we got both winch assist and we got, grapple cable, we don't even need choker setters. So safety wise, it's really valuable to us. It's cost effective. And it's and again, LiDAR tells us where to do it. All of a sudden now we know, okay, here's the sites that are best suited for this particular tree. And where do we still need to do traditional cable? So it's really a good example of a new technology, an innovation that came in that's now strengthened in its application by this other technology that came in. But it's also interesting because LiDAR had to evolve to get it to this point. So this is, sorry, it's not quite dark enough, but you can probably guess it. So this is a block we have in Quinault. It's a Western hemlock stand. It was age 8 times that we flew it. The upper left is a naked photo. It's just a color photo, right? And that's what our foresters had, right? They were free. We had them for everywhere. Great to use. And they could learn a lot from it. In the center is a LiDAR image, but this is one that's done with a relatively low resolution because of a low point density. This was like back in the day when 1 to 3 or 5 was sort of the best you could get for LiDAR. And if you look at it and you zoom into that little square, that's what's in the upper right. And that's what a canopy height model is, what the trees look like in that resolution. And our foresters looked at it and said, it doesn't tell me anything. I can't use that. LiDAR is worthless. Right? That innovation doesn't work. I can get more out of my color photo that's free than out of my LiDAR that you're going to pay, X dollars per acre to get extra. Right? But LiDAR at this point density didn't work. You're not limited to that point density. So when we started flying LiDAR, we made a decision to fly LiDAR at a required minimum of 18, and we get about 25 points per square meter. And so here's the 25 point per square meter stand, same spot, right? And all of a sudden, here's what you see. You can start picking out all the individual trees. So now, and here's zoomed in again, here you can see the individual trees. And in LiDAR, with that, looking at the cross section, I know the height of that individual tree. That tree's 14 feet tall, according to LiDAR. And I'm pretty sure that's right, within a foot. Right? So talk to our foresters now. Can you use this? What's that big hole? Well, that's a burn pile. I don't know. I never walked to it, but I guarantee you that's a burn pile. But that's the tool. So until the LiDAR was developed, it came along at the right point density and value, it wasn't useful. Now it is. That's important too. Like when we say fertilizer doesn't work. Well, sometimes fertilizer doesn't work because the trees aren't nutrient deficient. Doesn't mean fertilizer doesn't work. You just don't do it here with it. And so that all of a sudden, it makes big differences in our PCT program. We're using LiDAR to pick the stands, break the stands up. Where should we do it? When we're trying to budget for PCT, how many acres do we got? We can see it now. This stand needs PCT, but only right here. Right? Over there, we don't need it. So it saves a huge amount of time, saves a huge amount of walking through those stands. And right, when you're doing a PCT stand, before it's PCT, how far can you see to know whether or not you got to go over another? You just can't manage it, right? So it's a huge advantage in that context, in tool. And then the other thing that's right, it wasn't even going to put drones in. Drones are amazing technology, right? That have like 5 years, 5 years ago, did anybody have a drone? And none of our foresters could survive without a drone today. And it's one of the things that has a huge impact on, again, the efficiency and productivity, because they don't have to walk everywhere. So here's an example. That's one of our forests up in Forks. And then, so he's going out to do a PCT check, right? He's dressed to, go to church almost, just to fight his way through the brush. But here's what he sees, right? There's the PCT stand on the right, right? That's what he's able to look at, right? So he knows where it was done. Nobody can walk through this stand, right? Because the PCT slash is 5 feet off the ground. We won't allow our foresters to go in there. It's the most dangerous place that we could send anybody. But now he can see it. He can talk to the contractors and say, wait a minute, I don't like your density over here. I like this. This is good. I can look at the whole unit to see if the whole unit's done, and I can do it in 30 minutes, and then I can go to the next place. And we use drones. This same guy just the other day, I was talking to him. He said, he called and I was talking to him, and he said, yeah, I got to run out. I got to go check whether or not, I can get up and plant this unit, because I got to figure out, is the road, I know there's snow on the road, but how much and where, right? And I said, okay, well, I'll call you back tomorrow. I said, oh no, it'll only take you about 30 minutes. I'm just going to run the drone up along the road, and I called, when he called back, and I said, what is he? Oh, too much snow, can't get in. That would have taken him, all day walking up this road and then walking all the way back down. And what else could he have been doing? He could do things that are much more productive, like talk to me, than do that. So again, just a tremendous innovation that helps with that first objective we have. The other sort of thing that we have is the idea of just the amount of data we get. We do about 70,000 inventory plots a year. We harvest our allowable cut last year. Our cut last year in the US was 8 million tons, right? So if you assume, 30 tons, per truck, if you're at 80,000 pounds or whatever, that's 265,000 truckloads that we've got to keep track of, right? And we have an inventory system. We track every load of truck. We know, and we used to do it by paper. We'd staple a barcode. We thought we were really advanced. We'd staple a barcode on the load, and then when it came to the mill, they would scan it. And then, at the end of the week, they would send us the loads that came across. And then, it would come back to us and we'd input them into a computer and we'd have that. We now have systems that we call mobile load system, where all the scanning of every load of wood or every plot that we do is scanned. And as long as we have cell coverage, it's real time uploaded to our inventory database. And so the foresters that are working on it, they can watch in real time the loads that are leaving a unit, where it's going, how many went there that day, where the other logs are sending their units. And when we got a quota issue, they can say, wait a minute, stop sending from here, go to there, because we can get another 10 loads in there today or this week. And you have it real time. That you'll sit there and watch. Oh, look, they'll laugh at, not laugh, but oh, he's one of the bad drivers. Watch, he's going to stop. And his delivery time is going to be longer than everybody else, in that operating unit. And so it's just and this is just to show you, this is Power BI. This is an off-the-shelf program that our entire inventory system is in, everything. So you can look at this, click on it, you can slice it any way you want, down to the stand level, and the information is real time in there. So you get these summaries through Power BI. It's just a Microsoft product. It's awesome. And then you get all these people that you have to write your own code, right, to do it. So people get so excited. Everybody's writing Power BI codes for everything they do. It's really an incredible technology because we have information overload. How do we use the information we have? And that's what innovation and technology really helps us with. And the other thing that's really innovative is right here. In addition to my wife calling while I'm giving a talk here, she probably wanted to know if I was dressed. I'll tell the story. She told me the Starkers were generous enough to allow me to go to the field with them this morning. And so I was in regular forestry clothes. But my wife told me, if you just stop dressing like a bum, maybe your career would take off. So you're actually going to wear a coat and tie at this meeting. And she was probably calling to see if I had done that. But this is your phone, right? This is on the left. That's my phone. And that's our Washington land base in Forks. Right? I have on my phone every piece of information on every stand in that unit, in every stand in the country that we own. Here, if it's online, it's actually, if I have cell coverage and I'm online with it, it's actually real-time update. So as a change goes into the inventory system, it's updated instantly and you can see it. If you don't have cell coverage, you can do it all offline and you can see the status of it when you got it offline. So it might have been this morning. So if something happened this afternoon, you wouldn't know about it until tomorrow. But it's tremendous. What you have. It's you go there and here. What about this stand? Well, here's even to the point where we're tracking. For seedling survival issues. What species? Obviously, what seed lot? Obviously, but we're tracking now what nursery bed did it get planted in? When was it lifted? When was it put in storage, if we had any storage? When was it shipped? How long was it in transport? How long did it sit? What was the temperature and the rainfall before we planted it? And so you can look and say, well, obviously, this seedling, they should have done better, but oh, look, they put it was early in the year and they were stored for a week and a half in a cooler. And we really don't like to store them for more than a couple of days. So you can work those things out, but the information gets there and it's incredible. That's another off the shelf. That's an estuary product, right? That's field map from estuary. This awesome technology. So the other things I want to close on in a few minutes is all the other things other than growing forests that are important innovations. So climate change and carbon, right? You all know CO2 is going up. We know climate's changing with it. So what we have to do is understand climate smart forestry. That's an innovation for us. How do we react as a company and change what we do to reflect climate change? So here's on the left is, that's RCP 8.5. It's kind of one of the higher pathways that people propose, but it's the one we're on right now because we're certainly not on 1.5 with it. So temperature and precipitation. And one of the things that we know about climate change is there's going to be winners and losers, and that's unfortunate, right? There's going to be some places where climate change has catastrophic effects. If I lived in, Pacific Island that's 1 foot above sea level, probably pretty bad. But, when we look at climate change on a local regional basis, what we're starting to see is, certainly higher CO2 levels. And that leads to better water use efficiency and better photosynthesis rates. We're seeing temperatures goes up, which means growing seasons are longer. It's probably good. None of the temperature extremes go beyond really a critical area for our trees. We know we're going to have a little bit higher respiration losses than we would. And when we look at the regions, our land base in the south, kind of goes from, if I can show it here, sort of Texas to here. So by, the turn of the century, if it really stays up, we are a little bit worried about things going on in Texas and Louisiana getting drier. Not so much, maybe in Florida and Georgia. We're not really too worried about Washington and Oregon, where we own land on the Olympic Peninsula or down the coast. Central Valley, not so good, of California. Obviously, New Mexico, Arizona, West Texas. So, we're going to have to figure that out. We don't, we have to monitor that. We have to do all this, but that's what we have to understand. So how do we change what we do to adapt? Do we plant different species? Do we plant species further north? Seed lots change. Do we plant seed sources? Are the seed zones out here going to change? I'm sure they will. So that's important for us to understand. And that's a huge effort for us right now. The other thing is again, getting away from just our traditional products into the, ecosystem services. So, we do domestic export timber, we do minor products, we do minerals and energy, we got real estate, all that's our traditional products. But we do all these other things as well. Historically, we've never gotten paid for any of these, but they do add value. Whether or not they add monetary value or just, you know, goodwill value, we don't know yet for some of them. But things like carbon, you know, we do lease most of our land for hunting and recreational activities, get licenses, but that generates a lot of money. Aesthetics, biodiversity, T&E species, you know, whether it's the Humboldt martin or the marbled murrelet out here or the ochre tortoise in the south. Water, both water quality and water quantity are going to be important. You know, right now we own most of the land on the Hoquiam and Aberdeen watersheds in Washington. We don't get paid for it. We change our management. We don't use any herbicides or other things in the watersheds for their potable water. But you start thinking about, we're changing our management and it's a cost to us, you know, and we in Florida, you know, it's odd. Florida's, you know, we think of it as a swamp all the time, but it's some of the places with some of the greatest water deficits. And we've had water management regulatory agencies coming to us and asking us, what would it cost us if we asked you to reduce your stand density really low and drop the leaf area really low, so you decrease evapotranspiration, so we have more water flow into the aquifer and into the streams. Interesting proposition. Right? So that's, you know, those become really important to us as we move forward. And I think there'll be a lot of innovation in forestry around these ecosystem services. So we do carbon. We reported on carbon a lot. Some of you may have read it. You know, we sequester 14.5 million tons of carbon a year. It's about 3.1 million cars on our land base in the U.S. and New Zealand. With it, so that's a lot. You know, we monetize some of it in New Zealand through their program, none in the U.S. yet. We also look at our emissions, right? Everybody's got to push emissions reduction. So we know our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions that are basically a cradle to gate kind of analysis. We don't really look upstream and we don't look too much downstream for it. But in total, we had 380,000 tons. We sequestered 14 million. So we have 13.6 roughly million excess carbon sequestration annually in our forests. That's the huge benefit to climate change and things, and whether you know, and as we hopefully will reduce our emissions, that will grow even greater, because we will have to reduce our emissions like everybody else. And that's again a new innovation that we're going to have to figure out. Environmental issues and sustainability, right? You know, we innovated a lot with in Washington, timber fish. And RMAP has done a lot of work there. You know, the Oregon Forest Accord going to change things and it's going to require some innovation for that. You know, and again, it really relates to water quality and water quantity. You know, and how and where the SMZs. That's a stand map in Washington with it. But how that is going to have to change, and that's going to be an innovation to figure that out for sure. You know, innovations in forestry. This is our map, right? We spent, I don't know how much we spent, lost track on our map in Washington. You know, taking out a culvert and putting in something else to protect water habitat for salmon primarily, like obviously. But here's a good example. You know, this culvert was pulled out and we put a bridge in to provide fish passage for that. And so those kind of things, and that's going to, you know, show up a lot of other places, I'm sure. And then the last thing I thought I'd show you is just another new kind of thing that's coming out. eDNA, right? It's really an interesting tool, right? So in these streams, right, what we have to do in Washington is identify fish, non-fish habitat. And historically, we've done that by hiring a contractor to electroshock. So they walk up the stream, shock it, and then if there's fish that float up stunned, we guess that there's fish in that segment of the stream. And if they shock it and no fish float up, then there's no fish, and somewhere there's a barrier, right? So now we're starting to use eDNA. We take a sample of stream water, can run that through, and we can know upstream of that point what fish inhabit that and are there species. It's much more efficient, much more effective, and much more accurate probably than that. So it's a really interesting new tool that we can use to understand, you know, the biodiversity and habitat that we're trying to manage for. And so those, I think, it's another good example of the use of genomics in a kind of a way that we didn't think about originally. But, so I thought I, kind of covered a lot of weird topics maybe, but when I thought about it, but really, when I think about innovation, really is essential to our business. I mean, we can't stand still. We have to respond to these pressures and these forces that are coming at us. And we can do that in a very positive way. I'm firmly convinced that for the first time in my career, it's almost like every problem that comes up, the solution is sustainable forestry. Climate change, water quality, water yield, recreation, all these things. And what we're able to do is show that we can do this sustainably with managing timberland. We can grow our traditional crops for products. And that's what's really powerful. And that's where this, when we focus on the innovations, we have to make sure that it's adding the right value, both from our shareholders, but also the stakeholders. And that's having a large impact. We're getting, like most of you, we're getting pressure out of environmental groups in the EU about the harvesting that we do that goes into paper that then gets shipped to the EU. Right. And so our customers are asking us, hey, what are you doing? Because our customers are asking us, what are you doing? And so those are, certainly stakeholders that are important to us to understand that. And that, I think the future is, without being able to innovate, we could go the way of companies that don't exist anymore. We've been in business, I said, nigh on 100 years, and if you had Pope in for more than that, and we want to be in business another 100 years. And that's, what we think we have to do something. And I'm, giving you a snippet of some of the ideas. Maybe I can't, the interesting thing about innovation is I don't know what we're going to need to do tomorrow, but we're going to need to do something. So, and with that, appreciate, again, I really want to thank, the Starker Forestry, Vaughn and the Starker family for the invitation to come here. Oregon State for allowing me to come here and joked around. I tell people this, I applied here twice for school, both as an undergraduate graduate student, and I was denied both times. So, I don't know. You guys are pretty elite here. Maine would take me. Anyways, so if there's comments, discussion, happy to have anything we could do. I don't know how we're doing.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now it's working. So we have some time for questions or comments. We may use these microphones so people online can listen to the questions. Keith.
Thanks, Tom. So you showed a nice. I'm Keith Javik from the North Extreme Co-op. You showed a nice graph of the productivity going up. Do you think it's going to keep going up?
I think there's a maximum. For example, for loblolite pine in the southern United States, we're site index probably no more than 100, mid-90s. That's about the most we've ever seen. So I think at some point, we'll get to a point where that won't change, but I think productivity could increase by quality issues. So smaller branches, straighter trees. It could go also to shorter and shorter rotations. We can produce the same product that we would do in 25 years, in 15 years. That would be great. Alternative products. If we got to start supplying all the sustainable aviation fuel that the airline industries need from wood, that's going to be a very different product that you could start thinking about, shorter rotations, and all of a sudden 3 short rotations versus 1 longer rotation could yield more per acre. So there's different ways, I think, of thinking about it. But I ultimately, unless we crack the carrying capacity question for like southern pine, why does loblolite pine carry 300 square feet of basal area in Brazil? And the most I've ever seen is 204, 205, 210 in the South. no matter how much fertilizer and weeds we kill. So, that would be for Carlos to understand. Tell me what's the fundamental ecophysiology that limits growth of the species in this region.
Okay, any other question? Yeah.
The question is, with the climate change data, it's not quite up to the LiDAR in the sense of predicting extreme events. And I wondered if you just essentially have real-time data, you'll know where everything blows down or burns up. And then that injury management plan is alternative B, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Our biggest worry in climate change is not the average change. It's the exceptional events that occur, whether it's atmospheric river that floods out and all of a sudden our road engineering isn't adequate, right? Culvert size and bridge size isn't enough, and we got a plan for that. All the way to increased hurricanes, those sort of things, and none of the models predict that with any degree of accuracy. So again, climate smart forestry, it's kind of, how do we plan for that? Okay.
Having some trouble with the microphone, but any other question, guys?
Excuse me, you mentioned you did some innovative things down in the Florida area, I guess it was, with your HBU ground and your productive timberlands. Can you be specific about some of the things that you did that made it cohabitation of your neighbors and your forestry activities?
Yeah, so what we tried to do, particularly in the areas that are most rapidly expanding, is we've actually allocated and created a community development plan that's gone through review with the state and the county to focus development on specific areas. And so our effort is constrained or contained within that area. And so we have one just north of Jacksonville we call Wildlight that is 26,000 acres. It's kind of sit there and that's, when people come to us, we've got 90,000 acres across the highway, but when they come to us, no, it's here, and that's the flexibility we have, or that's what we're trying to do. And that works well because then you're working with and in collaboration with the community county governments and the state government. We have a development plan, master plan they've approved, so you can get buy-in from your community. You deal with collectively with schools and infrastructure and hospitals and all those sort of things as part of that plan, as opposed to, hey, we're going to do something, sell 100 acres over here and someone's going to build 40 houses. And we're going to sell something over here and somebody's going to build 100 houses. And then the county has no way of dealing with that infrastructure change. And all of a sudden the schools are overcrowded and the roads aren't, built to accommodate the community traffic and stuff. So that's our structure is to try and develop these community plans. We've got the same thing in like Kitsap County. Got a number of those because Kitsap County is now veteran community to Seattle. That's the best way we can think about it. That's why we actually have a real estate division. And that's what they focus on is how to do that. And we try to avoid these one-offs and, hey, I want 4 acres for my house lot over here. That compounds the problem down the road.
Do you get any increased conflict within these HBU acres, which were all managed as timberland at one point? Now you've got a bunch of people around. Does that create conflicts for your management?
Well, the trick is to try and say that the management is over here and it's on, for example, both of them use I-95 as the western edge. So on one side of I-95, we're continuing intensive forestry. On the east side of it, we don't. There's still, it does, a lot of them come in, right, and they don't like what they see on the other side of 95, but that still allows us to do most of our activities. We can do fertilization, we can do weed control, we can plant, we can harvest with it, and it's the best solution we can see, because there's no development pressures inevitable, right? And we actually, we held some property in the local community, kept hammering, we gotta have, you're constraining the whole community, we can't grow because you're rich, around where we want to be. And so we've actually worked with those. Okay, how do we develop a plan that allows your community to grow, and people need a place to live? That's just so. And again, a part of that, of that 26,000 acres, like more than half of it is in conservation easements and connected corridors and recreational facilities. All that's part of the plan, so that to us, it's it's the best we can think through to work collaboratively with our stakeholders in that community and say this is the best we can do. And their general response is, well, yeah, maybe we don't like it, but it's sure a lot better than that 12 houses over there that we as a county can't manage. Now we got to have fire protection, 12 miles away. And they have guidelines. We have to get a fire truck from the firehouse to that house within a certain period of time, and they won't start worrying about those sort of things. So it's an innovation we don't have the answer to. It's the approach we've taken, and we'll see. Hopefully it's better than some of the alternatives that are proposed.
Hey, Tom, your online audience has a question. Do you have intentions to invest in drones for LiDAR and advanced remote sensing besides visual assessments by foresters?
Yes. We are using, we haven't bought a LiDAR drone yet. If you've got an iPhone, what's it, 14? It's got a LiDAR sensor in it, I don't know if you know that. Right, and so our LiDAR guy has actually strapped his iPhone and flown the drone around, and hovered and stuff, and used it. So, but yeah, it's coming. LiDAR. We've done research on it. When I was at the university, we had a $40,000 drone and a $100,000 LiDAR unit that we bought, and then it crashed and they both broke. So we'd like to find a way to do it a little bit more cheaply, but yeah, that technology is going to evolve. You're going to have LiDAR at 250 points per square meter from a drone, whenever, wherever you want it.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. We don't have time for more questions, but now everybody's invited to the main hall, so where we have some snacks and refreshments. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.